The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Hey, it's 9 at night. It must be Citizen Mike. Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brudzinski. This is the episode for November 23, 2017. On my right, the editor of the Record Journal, Ralph Tomaselli. Ralph, we got some substantive, supple topics to talk about. But before we get into it, have a happy Thanksgiving.
Mike, same to you.
And a happy Black Friday.
I will.
And may all your shopping dreams be fulfilled.
They will be.
Okay, very, very good. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone at the Record Journal, and
thank you, Mike.
To our viewers too. Probably maybe the biggest story of the last week or so, as far as financial impact, is this announcement by the state of Connecticut that Wallingford wasn't going to be getting all the money it thought it was going to be getting, even after this big budget deal was cut by the legislators in Hartford. The headline in the Record Journal from November 18 says Malloy lays out cuts required by new budget, and it's a column, a story by Keith Phaneuf of the Connecticut Mirror.
Yes.
Before we get into the weeds on that, were you under the impression that there was another shoe to drop before this came out on November 18? Did you think it was kind of all set in Hartford and the money they reported Wallingford was going to get, or did you think this was coming?
No, I have to admit I was surprised to learn that the legislature essentially gave the governor an amount of money to be cut during the year.
Yeah. I was surprised too.
I was, although it couldn't have been a secret, right, Mike?
Not a secret.
No, it had to be somewhere, right? And so it had to be somewhere in a document.
State reps and state senators sure weren't talking about it.
They weren't talking about it, right? And I know you want to get into some other things with this, but you know, the interesting thing about that headline is Malloy lays out cuts required. Thank God for the word required by new budget.
Because you guys write the headline, right?
Right. Because it really, Malloy is first, but I'm not so sure that that's completely accurate.
Well, let's see if we can flesh this out. We got some stuff to review. First, I want to lay out the facts as laid out by Keith Phaneuf.
Yeah.
And here we go. He writes, Connecticut got a clearer picture of the painful cuts in the new state budget Friday when Governor Daniel P. Malloy imposed more than $880 million in spending cuts mandated by the General Assembly. Skipping, Malloy technically assigned most of the remaining cuts to social service programs, municipal aid, and higher education. Again, skipping. And there's sort of like a subheadline, town aid cuts spark angry response is how it goes. More than half of the $91 million in savings assigned to municipal aid would involve reductions to educational cost-sharing program payments to local school districts. But the plan also reduces the number of smaller property tax relief and other non-education grants. The ECA grants represent the state's major vehicle for aid to local education. The state also pays for the public contribution to the teacher pension plans, and so on. The Hartford Courant had a very, I think, good and wise take on this. They wrote an editorial And it brings us back to the heady times just in October, when everyone was, hey, we got finally, after all this time, after these extended negotiations, we finally have a budget, and we all can now relax, and we know the uncertainty is taken care of, as we were talking about as we opened the show. That's what we were led to believe. And so the Hartford Courant writes this editorial in the November 21 issue. How could they be surprised? It wasn't talking about you and me. Legislatures patted themselves on the back last month for finally, after a long delay, agreeing to a state budget, but they left a huge hole in the budget for Daniel P. Malloy to fill. They then flung their hands up in horror when he filled that hole in one of the few ways he could. He cut aids to towns and cities, they shrieked. How could he? He cut aid to cities. How could he do that? Well, it's hard to believe legislatures really were all that surprised, but feigned shock plays well back home. We're back home. Oh my God, how could that? Well, don't be so shocked, says the Hartford Courant. The legislators took the politically safe route. The Hartford Courant goes on to explain that the legislators in Hartford opted to have the governor make unprecedented cuts to the budget. And a lot of those cuts, will come from wage freezes and other concessions that state employees agreed to, but it still left about $400 million in savings. After all those cuts, it left about $400 million in savings over 2 years that the legislature ordered the governor to find. And this was, they go on to say, by the way, they didn't want him in the room where they were negotiating things. They didn't want the governor, we see it now in retrospect, they didn't want the governor saying, hey, you're leaving a $400 million hole for me to fill. Do you really want to do that? Because here I'm going to fill it in these ways that I've been talking about all the time. But the legislators wanted the door closed so he couldn't get in there and shine some light on the problem that they were going to create. So the Hartford Courant writes, this was, by the way, after excluding him from the budget talks, because legislators didn't like what he was saying about needing to look for savings in places they didn't want to be seen going. So on Friday, he went there. The legislators knew the governor couldn't lay off more people. They knew that his hands were tied by contracts and things like that. And the legislatures knew, according to the Hartford Courant editorial, the governor had very few options, and cutting municipal aid was one of them, so he cut.
Right.
I got some other stuff for you, but let me take a breath, get a sip of water, and get your thoughts where we are so far.
You raise a lot of points, and if you're represented by a state legislator, or a state representative, or a state senator that voted for the budget, you need to remember that some of them did vote for the budget knowing full well these cuts were coming, and then feigned surprise, which, I think as a voter, you said, well, the editorial said plays well back home. Well, it only plays well back home if you let it play well back home. But the other thing that I would say that maybe is a silver lining here is at least the General Assembly didn't borrow money or use some other accounting gimmick. At least the governor is cutting this money, as painful as it is, because I think, without being too broad brush here, one of the reasons Connecticut is in the situations it's in is because there were various gimmicks used, and at least this isn't a gimmick. So that is at least a silver lining here.
The editorial says it was the $91 million in municipal aid cuts that had the legislators most aggrieved. The cries of, how could he, came from all sides. Misguided, says Arasimowicz, who's the Democratic House Speaker. A source of grave concern, said Senate President Pro Tem Martin Looney, another fellow Democrat. Sabotage, said House Minority Leader Themis Clarides, a Republican. Senate Republican Leader Len Fasano said he would never trust the governor again.
Well, Mike, I just want to make the point there. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But those four legislators that
they're the guiltiest, but go ahead.
They are the guiltiest because they're in leadership positions.
Yeah.
And this budget would have, first of all, this budget was delayed because of them.
Yeah.
And it would have never passed unless they supported it. And And they were the ones inside the room when you could argue that other legislators weren't even inside the room when this was all being worked out. For those four to be saying that is really egregious.
Takes a lot of chutzpah,
It takes a lot of chutzpah.
A lot of
Thank you.
chutzpah. And just what did they expect? They didn't want to make the hard decisions. They left those to Governor Malloy. They uninvited him to the discussion, then took the much easier and much more politically safe route of accounting for the savings, but leaving it to the governor to allocate them, the governor's office said. The legislatures will argue that they told the governor to make cuts in such line items as other expenses and overtime, not in municipal aid. But their budget language says no such thing. In fact, it says, in fact, that cuts can be made in any budgeted agency of the state in order to achieve targeted budget savings. Okay, now we've beaten them up, but let's try to filter it down to what's going to happen at the local level. It's a little unclear as we produce this show on Wednesday, the 22nd, but to his credit, the mayor is putting an item on the agenda for the council meeting of November 28th, where hopefully this will all be fleshed out, and the mayor will have a thorough presentation, and councilors can ask questions to get at anything that was left out, and the Record Journal can follow up. Also, the item is a report regarding the financial impact on the legislators' cut and then Governor Malloy's subsequent cut. We have some numbers that were reported in the Connecticut Mirror that suggest the order of magnitude for Wallingford. Certainly what happens on November 28th is going to be the final word, so these are sort of rough and they're not internally consistent, but I did want to get sort of an order of magnitude. According to the Connecticut Mirror, the action by Governor Malloy will cost Wallingford about $1.8 additional dollars over what the legislature did, and it seems to be a total order of magnitude of about $3 million over the 2017 level. These are rough numbers. We wait to hear from the mayor and Jim Bowes. A final point, and then I want to get your reaction to it. This doesn't necessarily mean doom and gloom for the town of Wallingford, because the understanding is that when the mayor prepared the budget, which was adopted by the town council, he anticipated $5.8 million in reductions from state aid. He anticipated 5.8. But we got to get all those numbers together to see, if the town is really better off or worse off than was thought in May of 2017. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I think that it sounds like the mayor was prepared for this, or I should say that the mayor accounted for this, and then, of course, there's the issue of how the mayor does his budget generally in terms of...
Yeah.
So I think in the town of Wallingford, I don't think we're going to be looking at increased mill rate.
So let's talk about the town budget a little bit. This, of course, came up in the election. We had some discussion with John Letourneau about fund balances and surplus. You and I had some discussion with Vinny Testa about that. And my philosophical question, I guess, is, in view of everything that's happening, Bristol-Myers leaving, which we're going to get to in the next segment of the show, Bristol-Myers leaving, the state seems to be slowly wringing the sponge a little bit, year after year, because I don't think this is going to be the last time that Wallingford is cut back. It's probably going to go on and on because of deficits at the state level go on and on. Is this sort of backdrop going to take the wind out of the arguments that protest high fund balances in Wallingford and protest tax rates? Is this argument about we're overtaxed in Wallingford going to run out of gas because of what's going on at the state level? And I want you to assume something with me here. I looked at the unofficial numbers for the fiscal year ending 2017. These are computer generated in July of this past year. They give an unofficial, unaudited photo, sort of flash of how the town, seems to be doing. My rough calculations indicate that the town is going to be running basically break even, but a very small surplus as of the end of June 2017. All of that small surplus attributable to the Board of Ed. It looks like the town ran a small operating deficit. The small surplus is attributable to the Board of Ed. If that's true, if I am close, and we'll know in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if that's true, is the dust up over fund balances and tax rates running out of gas?
Well, but wouldn't it be a good thing if it ran out of gas? I mean, what you seem to be saying is that this year's budget is going to come in what I would say is a little more accurately. That there won't be this money left over.
Looks to me that way.
Right. So I think in some ways, in practical terms, that's a good thing. I mean, for those of us who don't want money, who find the money that's been left over, that is repeatedly left over, excessive. So I think it's good news, and also a long, if it continues, it was something that was raised for a lot of years, and perhaps, you know, the mayor adjusted.
Mayor took notice?
Mayor took notice, although I don't want to declare one way or another in one budget, but I mean, that's the way the system should work.
Yeah.
That other opinions are voiced, and they have influence.
Yeah, I think you got something there. It may be that the mayor has been affected by the light shown on the surpluses, and I think some evidence was, this is sort of a difficult subject, but I think some evidence of that back in 2016, where the mayor just flatly misrepresented the surplus, basically published a number that was half of what the surplus really was, maybe out of embarrassment as to how large the surplus was. And now we have in that year, the surplus is about $2 million. The following year it was about 1.6. Much of that attributable to the Board of Ed, not general government. And I think now we're looking at at basically a break-even year. We talked about budgets a lot, local budgets a lot on the show. And when we talked to Vinny Testa, we had kind of an incomplete discussion, you and I, because it was only an hour show, and we could have gone on for a couple hours.
One of many topics.
But I'm not sure of this. I sense you're a little bit frustrated by the council's inability to make the town budget more precise. Did I read you right? Your body language.
And I think frustrated because I didn't perhaps have a grasp, or as good a grasp as I thought Vinny had, where he was saying, well, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And yes, I think that's accurate.
Well, there's one thing that Vinny Testa said, that you and I discussed it off camera, and I probably should have intervened right there, but he was sort of on a roll. Vinny Testa said it's very difficult to pass a precise budget because he said the council has to deal with the budget on a line item basis. If you want to adjust the budget, you got to address a particular line item. And that's not so, in my opinion. The council can address a total department's budget as a bottom line number. You don't have to defend an adjustment to a particular line item, which fouls up a lot what might be efforts of councilors to adjust the budget. They get tangled up in line items and whether overtime or straight time or should be adjusted. You don't have to get into that minutia if you don't want to. I mean, if you choose to, you can. And here's some background for that. Back, and I can't remember the year, but it had to have been 2000, 2001, 2002, or 2003, and I didn't spend 2 hours researching the archives on this. But there was a motion on the council to cut, and I believe it was the Public Works budget, by $600,000. And the council got a little tangled up. What line items should it come from? But everyone sensed that they had been overfunded over the years, and the Public Works Department could do with less money. So there seemed to be enough votes to cut the budget by $600,000. But no agreement as to specifically what line item. And someone raised the question, well, do we have to name a line item? Do we have to do that? Right. And the opinion came from the law department. They were sitting there at the desk right next to the mayor. Says, no, actually, you don't have to name a line item. It's okay to pass a budget that cuts public works by $600,000 and leaves it up to the mayor to allocate where the savings was. And on that basis, the budget was cut and the motion was passed. The mayor was furious, but he didn't veto it.
And that seems to make not only legal sense, but doesn't it make sense from the role of the council and the role of the mayor? The role of the council is not to micromanage each line item in the budget. It's to give direction to the mayor on where they may want to reduce. So, and wouldn't you want to give the mayor that? Would you want the council deciding what line item? That's not their area of expertise.
Well, I think in many circumstances, that's right. I think that's a smart way to go about it.
Right.
You can sense out of history and out of your budget workshops what departments may have too much money based on historical spending. And we've talked about this. Historically, Public Works has had a lot of money left over. The amount set aside for the pension contribution has had a lot of money left over. The police department, that's a sacred cow. You can't touch the police department's budget. So there are areas where you just look at it and do some rough math, and maybe you take the last known audited figure and say, okay, allow them 2 or 2.5% a year, and this budget looks a lot more than that. And, you can sense it, and you could very smartly, vote for a reduction, the details of which are left up to the mayor.
Yeah.
Much as Len Fasano, Themis Clarides, and the legislatures left the details up to Governor Malloy for $400 million.
Right.
Yeah? So
Right.
that's a second precedent I got for you.
Right. No. So
Yeah.
I think that's. I'm glad you clarified that. And one thing that I also like about that is, and I like about it at the state level is, like, I might not agree with the mayor's overall budget philosophy, but he is the hands-on manager of the town. And if reductions have to be made, I think I do trust his judgment in that regard. So you could disagree with the mayor's overall budget philosophy, but acknowledge that as the chief executive, that he is the one who should make the reductions.
Yeah. Another point, in Wallingford, it's important to remember that reducing a budget isn't necessarily the same as reducing spending.
Right.
They're different
Yeah.
in Wallingford, and it's so easy to assume that a cut in the Public Works budget of, I'm making a number up now to illustrate the point, a cut of $250,000 from Public Works means they spend less. Doesn't mean that, because they usually have so much more
Right.
left over in their budget.
Right. Now,
So-
one question, though. Could
Yeah.
you give them, without giving the mayor specific direction on where in the budget, could you give him very general direction on reducing spending and not give him a department?
That wouldn't work.
Okay.
I think the authority of the council is not to dictate spending, but to dictate the budget. And if they're that serious about reducing spending, they've got to cut the budget enough so that it forces a reduction in spending.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of small departments that come in very close to their budgeted amounts. So if there's a small department, they're budgeted $100,000 and they spend $98,000, you could cut them by 50% if you wanted, but that's going to be a real cut in spending.
Okay.
That's all I was. So that takes us to Bristol Myers.
Okay.
Bristol Myers was in the newspapers because of their tax appeal, and the tax appeal has been settled. And what do we mean by a tax appeal? Well, the town assessed Bristol Myers a certain amount based upon a valuation of their property. Bristol Myers thought, oh, too much. That's not what the property is worth anymore. So they took the town. The town to court and complained to the court that the assessment was excessive, and the case is now settled. The details of the settlement are top secret. It's a matter of national security. The council approved the settlement at its last meeting on November 14. The details will eventually come out, eventually. Actually, they may not come out at a council meeting. It may take the Record Journal or the Citizen Mike Show to get out the details. We don't really know.
Okay.
But right now the details are top secret. They didn't have to be secret, but that's the culture of the council, to keep even the process secret. Not the best practice, but we fought this battle again and again. We'll continue to fight it. But just a little overview of what a tax appeal what it looks like. So Bristol-Myers takes the town to court, and the judge handles it based upon competing values submitted by experts by each side. Did I garble that? So Bristol-Myers has got to have an expert on property values, and the expert is, submits a report, and he's ready to testify, and he backs up his valuation with his theory and things. And then the town probably had just Shelby Jackson, our assessor, who is a skilled appraiser in his own right. He has his idea, and now the judge has these two widely differing views of value, and the judge is going to have to figure this out. That's what judges get paid to do. Maybe the best way, just in my view, of valuing properties was sales of similar properties. What did it, like a house, go for? Well, a lot of houses on the market, you can actually get a market for a house. But if you have something as complicated and specialized as a Bristol-Myers campus, something that is huge, it's very hard to get a similar sale of a Bristol-Myers-like campus in Connecticut. And if you go out of state, it becomes less and less relevant. Like a sale in New Jersey, I mean, so what? So it becomes very subjective as to what that property of Bristol-Myers is worth. There's other ways of valuing property besides similar sales. Sometimes you could take a replacement value but then depreciate it by the number of years the building has been up, something like that. Or there's something called an income value. If the property generates a profit, appraisers from time to time can come up with a value based upon that. Details are well beyond the scope of this episode. But that could be explained to the public. I mean, after all, this is like $1 million a year issue or more. It's in that order of magnitude the taxes we're going to lose. Probably before we sign off for 2017 in the middle of December, we'll probably have those numbers. Not that anyone won the case or lost the case. It's just, what are you going to do? Bristol-Myers is gone. They can't sell the property. My understanding, it was listed by Bristol-Myers for in the $50 million range. They couldn't sell it there. The town had it listed for value before this appeal at over $100 million. I mean, come on. So that's where we are.
I agree.
Speaking of taxes and Bristol-Myers and economic development, okay, let's go back to this election that we just had, because economic development was a marquee issue. My question for you, though, as my expert on the town's sentiment on all issues, the mood of the town, the pulse of the voters. This is you. This is why you're sitting here, right? Is economic development a big deal with the voters?
I can't say that it's something that people are talking to me about on a regular basis.
Because it sounds, after the election, heretical. It sounds like it's heresy for you to say it's not that big a deal. I mean, so much time and attention seemed to have been devoted to it.
Well, at election time.
At election time.
Yeah, I noticed that at election time it got talked about, but, you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Economic development is something we were going to touch on the next couple shows, and in part because on our last show, which I think is going to be we'll produce it on December 13 before we call it quits for the year. We're going to have Tim Ryan on, who is the economic development specialist for the town, and also Casey Costello-Hand, who was a town planner, and together we're going to have a talk about those sorts of issues. So I wanted to get our thinking a little sharper in anticipation of them. And when we talk about economic development, I think it means different things to different people, but I'm sort of going to you for that. When I think about the kind of economic development that matters to me, I think about redevelopment of some shabby properties downtown. Absolutely. And secondarily, I think of grand list growth. But grand list growth, it would be pennies on my tax bill. I mean, and some years you have good luck and some years you have bad luck. And I think to a large degree, it's beyond the power of the town to move the needle much. But what's the perception you think of the voters? Well, the perception of voters. And yours, too, of course. I think you make an excellent point that economic development is a term that needs to be, well, there's all kinds of subsets of it. Yeah. So one kind of economic development in my mind might be for example, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit more. I'm not trying to jump the gun here, but like we have a new train station in town, and one type of economic development could have been the town buying properties near the new train station to encourage business, some kind of business, or maybe it would be housing, but it would involve the town purchasing property, or at least accumulating property to try to attract a developer. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, if they're not for sale, what do you do?
Well, right.
Or not to sale for the price you want to
You're
pay.
right, they're not all kinds of things. Another type of economic development, you brought up downtown, might be to make, some kind of grants or loans available to downtown property owners that would incentivize them to improve properties, rebuild properties. So, I mean, there's just two things just off the top of my head. The thing that economic development generally requires, though, from a municipal standpoint, is spending money. It's hard to do it without putting up some money or acquiring grants. So,
well, those that aren't too thrilled with that would say it's spending money, but those that love it would say it's investment.
well,
It's
right,
how you
and
phrase the issue.
Not necessarily anybody is.
Yeah.
Neither side is wrong.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that if you look to other municipalities that have created downtowns that are more vibrant than ours, or municipalities that are building housing, commercial developments around train stations, I mean, that's one way to approach it. It's not required,
Yeah.
but that's one thing, one way to go at it.
Well, I'm going to, for the purposes of this show,
Right.
actually, let me start again with my disclaimer.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure it's appreciated that sometimes to ferret out a clear position from a guest or from you or from myself or anybody else, to ferret out a clear position, it becomes necessary to be the devil's advocate.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to throw them a fastball right down the middle of the plate to see if they can hit a home run.
Okay.
And if you throw softballs all the time, anyone can hit a softball.
Okay.
So sometimes, and I change hats pretty subtly, and it's not always clear, but I'll be the foil, and I'll say, make your case, make it clearly, and let's keep making it. And if we sense that the case is becoming hard to make, or it gets bogged down in generalities, maybe there isn't that kind of a case to make.
Good point.
So John Letourneau was on the show last week, and he said the train station was going to result in a renaissance. That's the word he used.
Renaissance.
And I pressed him to walk me through how this is going to work. First, what's a renaissance? How do we know it when we see it? And explain how it's going to work. Well, I had to come back to the word renaissance again and again because I was being the devil's advocate, but I don't see the renaissance as a result of this train station. But the Democratic candidate for mayor, Jared Liu, said the train station is a gift. Jason Zandri has been a great proponent of the train station. And maybe the one thing Steve Knight and I have in common was we're both skeptical of this renaissance that's going to be coming because of the train station. But I'm turning the camera on you, Ralph.
Right.
Because you got that Meriden experience.
Right.
Your office was right there. You've seen, the downtown. It's a different kind of downtown, different kind of problems.
Right.
We know the risks involved in this train station. The risk to the state is huge expense. We know the risks to Wallingford. There's all kinds of track crossings and traffic gates coming down to block traffic.
Right.
We know that there's some big parking lots which, if filled during rush hour, is going to be significant delays. But I need the case to be made again as to how the train station, step by step, leads to something materially better that the people living on the west side would care about, people living on the east side would care about. How does it work?
Good point.
And Bruce is going to get the camera right on you.
On me.
I better, right. I hope. So, and if you don't know, that's fine.
No,
we're going to keep.
First of all, I think renaissance is a strong word.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Rhetorical flourish there.
But one thing that I think is worth pondering a little bit is, would the is the rail line potentially a draw in terms of people who might want to live near the rail line and use it? And so that might open the door for some new housing.
Well, there's some big housing projects already slated.
Right.
So how much can the town absorb? How much can the downtown area absorb? And is this a matter of faith? Is this a matter of, well, if we build it, they will come?
Well, that's...
And then where do they go? They're not going to
Right.
commute to Hartford.
When you say housing already slated,
Yeah, there's some big projects, some residential units already set for that Parker Avenue area.
okay.
Some big buildings with a lot of units. We're going to ask Casey when she comes on the show, the status of that. But I think there's, more than, a couple hundred units on work in progress there.
Well, then there you go.
Does that do it?
Well, I don't know, but
Is that Renaissance?
That's certain. No, it's not a renaissance, but it's a start. And
Okay.
I mean, that's one thing you might consider with the new train station. You also might consider, what kind of businesses should be you're going to have a parking area that may be attracting consumers. So what kind of businesses do you want around that parking?
Why is that? I'm going to be your foil now.
Okay, right.
Because that was my disclaimer.
Right.
Okay?
No, I think it's good.
Of what relevance is the question, what kind of businesses do I want? I can't force businesses in there.
You cannot. No, certainly you can't. But there
I'm going
are...
to tell you what I want. I'm going to answer that question
Right.
because we've had this discussion before.
Right.
I want an Eastern Mountain Sports,
Okay.
full size.
Right.
My wife wants a Talbot's,
Right.
okay? And no, not a little Talbot's.
Right.
That's what I want. And we both want, a good Starbucks with a full-service bakery. That's what we want. Take it away, Ralph.
Well, a Starbucks might
You've
work.
asked me and I've answered.
Right. No, I think it's a all good thing.
Eastern Mountain Sports, I
Well,
want them to
don't know
stock
if that-
kayaks
I
and
don't
skis
know
and
how
all that.
I don't know the interest in those, whether that would work.
Believe
the
me,
commuters.
if they could make a profit, if those outlets could make a profit,
They'd
they'd
be
be here.
You're right.
So,
I think one thing we're identifying is
Yeah.
that economic development, the one thing I can say from watching it in other towns is it's not easy. And I don't mean to cop out there, but I think what you don't have in Wallingford is maybe a cohesive economic development effort. I'm not saying that you don't have people like Tim Ryan and Casey Costello and maybe the Planning Commission that are all working on things, and maybe there's more things in the works than I even know about. But you really need the mayor and I would say the council to have roles in the process.
we're going to make that the last
Okay.
word on this narrow topic, because it's going to be continued, when Tim Ryan and Casey Costello
Yes.
get here, and we'll replay that speech you made.
Right. And I'm chuckling
Good
because
idea.
I think you're a really good foil. But I think the foil is part of the process, too, that these things only get solved if they're vigorously debated.
So during the campaign,
Yeah.
the mayor raised, in his fashion, economic development as an issue, and he sent out a flyer. We're going to put that up on the screen in a minute. We have three JPEGs we're going to put out, and I think maybe the other thing that I agree with, I know Steve from time to time watches this show, so I can poke fun of. The other thing maybe he and I might agree on is the mayor's campaign was a status quo campaign. It was the mayor serving up comfort food in the way he does, and it works. Year after year, cycle after cycle, the serving by the mayor of comfort food and status quo policies that don't appear too risky, that appear stable, it works, and that's that's no doubt that's what Wallingford wants. He gets reelected. So we have an example of this, and halfway through our discussion, it's going to take a turn that you expect, because I discussed it with you off camera,
Okay.
but our viewers may not expect. Bruce, if you could put that JPEG 1 up there. So this was a postcard that the mayor sent out, and you can see it is, kind of comfort food. It's not policy at all, but it is, photos of people smiling and enjoying themselves. It's a vote for Bill Dickinson kind of a thing. And, you do get a comfort food, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and
Right.
things are fine. So this is in part a mailer that has to do with business investment, employment, and education. And we'll go to the reverse side, which is JPEG 2, Bruce. And it says encouraging education, business investment, and employment. But again, we have comfort food photos up there, Lyman Hall and kids and smiling faces lined up for photo ops. And if you can get close to your computer screen or your TV, we work down the talking points. You can see that, the mayor's, if he means these to be accomplishments, whatever it is,
Right.
they're very mild and they're very lightweight. The celebration celebrated the 100th year of Lyman Hall High School, of course, which he had nothing to do with. Adopt a new downtown, new is in caps, downtown planning and zoning regulations for transit-oriented development. The third talking point, developed school curriculum to promote workplace skills. Of course, he had nothing to do with
He had
that. That's a
nothing to
Board
do
of
with
Ed
that.
thing. But, this is comfort food
Right.
campaigning. And below that, implemented the incentive housing zone in the downtown. Well, the Planning and Zoning Commission adopted that in 2014. So it's sort of yesterday's news, but it's fair enough, Initiated, the next one, initiated an aggressive economic development business retention program. That's been on the books for years. I mean, I don't know when that was initiated, but I'll bet that's 20 years ago. I mean, we'll find out in a couple of weeks. Welcome 25 new businesses to Wallingford, and we're not going to talk about how many left or,
Right.
reduce staff. No. And maintain low taxes and lowest electric rates. Well, that's right, depending on your perspective on the
Right.
mill rate.
Right.
So here's the thing, is we go down to the second talking point in JPEG 3, Bruce. You go down to the second talking point, it reads, adopted new downtown planning and zoning regulations for transit-oriented development. That's false. That didn't happen. That's not true. That's misdirection. That's deception.
Right.
Now, you can say, oh, it was inadvertent. Well, if someone is claiming that, they're going to have to walk me through the inadvertence. What, someone made it up and it wasn't proofread?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you get this wrong? And new is all in caps.
Right.
How do you lead the public to believe that we have brand spanking new transit-oriented developed regulations when we do not?
Right.
So, Bruce, let's take that down, and I'm going to put Ralph on the hot seat here, but he knows this is coming. So if you're the press, and you know this has happened,
Right.
what's the role of the press, the duty of the press? Do you call them on it? Do you let it go? Is it beyond the scope of what a small-town newspaper can do? I mean, you're not the Washington Post, you're not the New York Times, you're not the Hartford Courant.
Right.
You're a community newspaper.
Okay.
So take it away.
All right. Well, and
Yeah.
I did check our archives, and
Yeah.
I did not find the mayor and transit-oriented development. So, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think this appeared in the Record Journal.
Correct.
We do have a reporter that.
Let me just clarify what you said. The mayor didn't make a statement to the Record Journal that he adopted or the town adopted.
Or
Is that what
if
you
he
meant?
made a statement, it didn't make it into the paper.
Okay.
Okay. But again, I just wanted to, so I did check that. And we do have a reporter that covers town and covers the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now, we do move people around a lot more than we used to, so there isn't as much continuity. So, of course, I would hope that the reporter would at least know about a set of regulations that hasn't been passed, or so a falsehood.
But you would not know necessarily about this misrepresentation unless you got the postcard.
Well, that's true. So
And
I'm
it's
just trying
kind
to
of by
take it like
dumb
you're
luck
right.
that I have
Now,
it.
I was not aware of this postcard.
Yeah. I wasn't
Now,
either before the election.
certainly, what usually happens, and it used to happen a lot more often, was the Democrats would have gotten a hold of this and said, hey, listen, Mayor Dickinson's putting out a mailer with a falsehood. And while we're not going to, we're not necessarily going to get into every claim and counterclaim in a mailer, if someone identifies just a flat-out lie in a mailer, I think that's something that we would generally, we would report on.
Well, that's the question I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Right.
Let's assume that the Democrats did their job, and I'm not accepting that major
Right.
premise.
Okay.
You become aware
Right.
through your own devices
Right.
that this has gone out and it's
Right.
before the election.
It's a story.
Now, what do you do specifically? How do you handle that?
Well, like, if someone is saying something that we just know isn't a
Like
fact,
this.
right?
Yeah, what do you do?
I think it is our role to at least let people know that something is factually incorrect. I mean, we can't, some topics are like economic development. We're not. If the mayor is saying he's strong on economic development and Jared Lew is saying no, he isn't strong, I'm not sure that's a fact.
That's different.
That's right. So I am trying to say that I think that this does warrant a story, and any falsehood that anybody would put in an ad. And I think we used to do more of those stories, quite frankly, because I think we used to rely more on the opposite party to come forward, and I'm assuming that the Democrats knew about this
No,
mail.
I don't know why you. I mean, I'm not sure who knew about it, but the other thing, this was surely not sent to Democrats because it wasn't sent to me.
No, I know that.
So this was sent to either Republicans or Republicans and unaffiliated or some sort of a special list.
Right.
But to say, or to even sort of even go there a little bit, that the Democrats are to blame.
No, they're not. I didn't mean that.
And some people just don't want to be a source,
Right.
They just don't want to be a source. So I guess my takeaway is this: next election cycle,
Right.
if someone makes a misrepresentation of an existing fact,
Right.
it's not opinion, it's
Right.
not a
We'll
matter
do a
of
story on it.
emphasis, you would do a story.
Yeah, I think a fact. Like we're not going to get into the. I think I've said it. I'm not trying.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into parsing every mailer that goes out. But if someone claims something that just isn't true, that's a little different.
You'll shine a light on it.
Shine a light on it.
All
Now,
right.
one other thing that factors into this is a little. I'll go a little quicker.
Yeah.
We're certainly held more responsible. And we're held more responsible for the ads that run in the Record Journal.
Oh, I
and
would agree.
I think we used to get a lot more calls from one side or the other if we ran an ad and it had a falsehood.
Yeah.
And so I think because that people tend to use mailers more, that doesn't happen as much.
So I agree with you, and I am heartened and encouraged by what you say. I think
Got it on tape.
I think a major misrepresentation like this that goes out probably to thousands, if not thousands of people, does elevate itself to news.
Right.
Now, here's the conundrum.
Right.
It occurred to me in driving into the studio.
Mm-hmm.
If something like this is exposed,
Right.
does that put the burden on the Record Journal staff to view every YouTube video that every candidate puts out and scour it
No,
for?
we can't do that.
I know.
Right.
I know.
But we can.
And I'm trying to draw the line.
No, I think I'm not saying
Yeah.
we can do that, but I think
Yeah.
we can determine pretty quickly is, did the Planning and Zoning Commission adopt regulations for transit-oriented development? Yes or no?
Right.
That I think we can do.
Let's change the subject
Yeah.
quickly here. It's of continuing interest, to me at least, this past election, that voters across the country, and particularly in Connecticut, and it seems to me particularly in Wallingford, reacted adversely to the presidency of Donald Trump and created a little anti-Trump wave, not a major tidal wave, but a little Democratic wave that showed itself in town as Vinny Testa doing quite well, being the top vote getter on the town council, Democrat, Jason Zandri being number 3, Craig Fishbein always a strong vote getter on number 2. And without some sort of a Democratic wave, who would have guessed it? And that seems to me confirmed by the Democrats' strong performance on the Board of Ed. I mean, they had excellent
Right.
candidates, but
Right.
I mean, to show this strong is contributory evidence that there was sort of an anti-Trump wave, and that led to a defeated candidate from Groton, I think it was, to put a op-ed into the Hartford Courant. And it reads, "A Connecticut Republican in Trump's shadow," and it's about a guy who ran for local office in I think it's Groton. My eye isn't falling on it, but he wanted to run for office as a Republican and avoid, or I would suggest evade, the question, are you part of Trump's base? Are you a Trump supporter? And he thought that he shouldn't be asked that question, shouldn't be compelled to answer, really on the grounds of political expediency, because if he answered, he would lose some of his potential vote while addressing questions that were not of local concern. And his point was, why should I be penalized for my supporting Trump on national issues when they don't filter down to local issues? Mm-hmm. We may see this coming up, in 2019, 2018 and 2019. What are your thoughts on how a Republican in Trump's shadow should deal with this kind of an issue? Speak from the heart, go for political expediency, try to filibuster the answer until your 2 minutes at the forum expire, and there's no follow-up? What should happen here?
Well, I think you should speak your heart, because at least you can live with that. And the other thing I'd add from I'll try to make this succinct. The notion that people will take out their frustrations with President Trump on really local candidates.
Yep.
And here's what I'd say for anybody that's wondering that. Now, I don't work for the New York Times or the Washington Post, but I have gotten a feel over the last year and longer what it's like to be part of a group that President Trump constantly demeans and attacks. I'm a member of the media. I'm not a member of the Washington Post or the New York Times, and maybe people would say, Ralph, lighten up, but he has repeatedly attacked my profession, and so I got a feel for what it's like to be part of one of these groups that he does that to. He does it based on ethnicity. He does it based on profession. Some people would think gender. And it has definitely, I am someone that, especially at the local level, has never thought of party. But I have to admit, for the first time in this local election, I thought about it. And I thought about it because, I don't like being attacked. I don't like being demeaned. And one way I can make my voice heard, I don't think I'm ever going to convince President Trump, but one way I can make my voice heard is by stop supporting people that are part of the party that President Trump belongs to.
Do you believe that expressing public support for Donald Trump, if you're a Republican, in any way informs on your public policy values or the choices that may come up in the future? Is it informative in any way, do you think?
It absolutely is to me. And I'll tell you what, I can take the people, I'm okay with the people that are supporting the president openly, just like I can deal with anybody who at least states their position to me. I can respect that. I can deal with that. I know where they are. What really is starting to grate on me is the people who are Republicans and who like to say things like, well, I didn't vote for the president, or I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, or I supported a third party. It's the people that are really trying to thread the needle that, for political purposes, because they want as many Trump voters as they can get, but they don't want to alienate any more people than they want. Those are the people that are really starting to bug me. The people that are out there saying, I support the president, and they're clear about it, okay, that's
Yeah,
fine.
but let's make this gel, I want to make this gel a little
Right.
more
Yeah,
specifically.
go ahead.
So there's a local voter out there.
Right.
So let's say for town council.
Yep.
Okay? And, I'm sorry, there's
Yep.
a local candidate, that's what I
Right.
meant to, and you're
Right.
the local voter.
Right.
And there's a candidate out there. And this candidate has possibilities for you.
Right.
Yeah, you're on the fence, but then you find out this council candidate is a Trump supporter. Do you break away from him?
I may, but I'm probably less likely to break away from that person than someone who's tried to play it a little too cute.
So someone who's playing it cutesy, you can kind of read through those tea leaves, or you can sort of pierce the veil, and you
Right.
will.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if and then of course what I'd really like is someone at the local level who speaks out and says, no, I don't support the president constantly demeaning people based on their ethnic background, their profession. Maybe I'm being selfish here, but someone who might say, I especially don't like the attacks on the media because I happen to think that while we might not agree with everything the media does, that they have a role in society. So those, of course, are really the people that
Yeah.
I'm more likely to support.
So this guy who wrote the op-ed, John Scott, lives in Mystic. I may have said Groton, but maybe it was in Mystic. I think maybe he would have been better off in running for local office if he said something like this. I'm a Republican, and yes, I did vote for Trump, here's why, but I'm not voting for him again, here's why. Or, I voted for Donald Trump before, and I will again, here's why. Or something like that, and this, I think, reinforces your point. Just be honest and be clear, and I think you'll have a better shot with the voters. How a local candidate views national issues does inform my vote. And especially with someone like Donald Trump, because I think character is destiny, and he's had his problems. But this segment is not about Donald Trump necessarily.
No.
But I think go ahead.
Well, I just want to play a foil to myself, which is that I'm not saying that supporting Donald Trump is a litmus test. I'm also okay with somebody who might say, here are specific policies that the president agrees with that I also agree with. That's okay. That's being honest and upfront. I don't need you to. It's not a litmus test one way or the other, but be specific and don't try to be cute about it.
Let's make that the final word.
Okay.
I like that as the final word.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Citizen Mike Show. Have a happy Thanksgiving holiday. Ralph and I are here producing shows on Wednesday afternoons. They're going to be broadcast on WPAA 9 o'clock on Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And if you prefer, go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. It's a Citizen Mike Wallingford channel. Click all the appropriate buttons. It may take a couple of seconds to get used to the layout, but you YouTubers, you know what you're doing. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time. And hey, if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike.